A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always, and pleased that you have joined us. Now, communities have unique histories, traditions, and cultural aspects that define them and set them apart from others. Sharing those stories through television program helps preserve and celebrate the cultural heritage of those communities, ensuring that future generations remain connected to their roots. Well, joining that list of contributors to whom my community remains grateful is Mr. Daniel Holder. As a retired educator who specialized in the teaching of geography, after he introduces us to his community, Mr. Holder places it squarely in geographical perspective.
Yeah, sure. We're talking about the Whitehall village, the village of Whitehall in St. Michael, bounded in the south by the Codgerton Estate part, and so the Spooners Hill Road as well as the Green Hill Main Road. In the west by Long Gap and Grisette communities, in the north, Cavehill, Rockdanda, and the northeast, the Eden Lodge area, which encompasses the boundaries of this village of Whitehall. Now, in true Bajan sense, I was born, literally born and raised in Whitehall. Born just 2 houses away from the Whitehall Methodist Church as you are traveling. If you're going towards the church in another direction, there's 2 houses away, but even so, if you're coming south, still 2 houses away from the Methodist Church. So I am indeed a true-blood Whitehall boy. It is a village which had some interesting features to it, particularly as it relates to the people who have lived there over the years. I sometimes say that there is a sort of divide because on the Whitehall Main Road, which we refer to as the front road, as opposed to up the gap. And there was a difference because the action took place up the gap. The main road was sort of quiet, staid community. But once you got up the gap, essentially Bradford Gap as it was called, they now called Whitehall number 3. That's where the action took place. The games, the agricultural activities in the community, people who were into farming, who had their own domestic gardens and livestock. In that part of the village of the Gap, in the tenantry, so to speak, you really met the life and soul of the village, the characters in the village. But you know, I said the main road, but the main road has some interesting features to it because right next to the house where I live was Nurse Carter. Interestingly, in those days, you know, she was not addressed by title of Miss Carter or Mrs. Carter. She was addressed by her profession, Nurse Carter. And her son, St. Clair Carter, was a corporal in the Harbour Police. But I have fond memories of seeing him in his broad hat, his white tunic, so to speak, blue pants, and of course the anchor and so on the uniform. But opposite them lived Constable Cumberbatch. And next to Constable Cumberbatch lived Constable Downs. And next to Constable Downs lived Corporal Atherley. 2 houses away, 3 houses away was Sergeant Catlin. I don't know how that came about, how you could have had, especially when the force is not so large. 4 police officers, 5 of them really, living. And then further along the villages, you went up through the gap, you had Station Sergeant Springer, who was in charge of District D in St. Thomas. So I thought that that was an interesting thing there. And if you move further along the main road, you had Frederick Dean near the top of the gap, who was the headmaster at Montgomery Boys School, which almost all of us attended in those days. I somehow went further along the road, but before you got to Frederick Dean, you had Nicky Seeley, who was the chief engineer at that time of the Barbados Water Works Department, now Barbados Water Authority. And of course, you know Alison C.D. Smith, his daughter, she was born and raised in Whitehall as well. I'm only talking about the main road there to speak, and I almost forgot there was Alton Thompson, who as a young man went out to the sea as a merchant seaman. He learned the trade, so to speak, and eventually he became a mate on one of the, I think it was a Harrison liner, but when he retired, he came back to Barbados and he became captain of one of the tugboats in the Bridgetown port. A small village, but you see we are throwing up a whole lot of people who have made outstanding contributions to Barbados. I dare suppose as I speak, some other people will come back to mind, people who live there. Oh, and I almost forgot, a friend of mine, a contemporary of mine, Charles Piggott, who in recent years retired as a deputy permanent secretary in one of our ministries. And if you was talking about a small village, at the corner of Braffett Gap, which is now called Whitehall Number 3, there was James Braffett, a very interesting gentleman. I can see Mr. Braffett now, pinstripe suit, gold chain and watch, shoes shining, I really mean shining, hat and so on, as he would have been going off to town from time to time. But the interesting thing about James Braffett is that he had been to Panama, came back to Barbados. He had some savings which he invested in 4 rental units which were on the property of the Whitehall Church. But there were 2 separate units and 2 which were attached to each other. And he rented these units to people who lived in the village. So he had this entrepreneurial spirit, so to speak, because, I mean, if you gone off to Panama, you went off to Panama, you made some money, and you decided, well, I'm going. You saw that there was a demand for rental units, and so you invested in at least 4 of them. And they were there for years, I smile because remembering Mr. Braffett, he had a pond in which he planted a thing called watercress, which he would sell in town. And when the rain really poured, when it really fell heavily, Mr. Braffett would come, and there were lots of frogs towards which would come and go into the pond. And he would come out with this stick, in what we call in Bajan parlance, a grabbler, long stick. And he would go and punch the frogs and pull them up one by one until he had the stick full of frogs. And then he would go and throw them in the water course. There was a water course in the gap there. But I'll get back to the water course. But it was called Braffett Gap because he literally owned half of the land on the left-hand side of the road as you were going up into the gap, into the tenantry. Talking about the water, as boys we had some interesting and exciting days. The water came from Lodge Hill, came down what later became Rotterdam Park, came through the Rotterdam Estate, and over to Main Road, came through by a lady called Miss Ellis, and then came back onto the Main Road, exited by the Roaches. Now, the Roaches are an interesting family as well. And then made its way down through a water course and went down into Long Gap and found its way all down to through the bridge. And as boys, we enjoyed that when the rain fell, we would make small boats and sail them along the water course. But what was interesting what is interesting in those days, we did not have vans or buses going into either lodge or into the tenantry. So those people who live up there would have to disembark on the main road and then cross the gap. But when the water was really flowing and high, it was difficult. And there's a chap who was now deceased, we used to call Cuckoo Bruce. He would bring a ladder, and we would put a saw stone at either end of the ladder, and we would help people to cross. So it's like a temporary bridge, so to speak. Right. Yeah, but the water used to come down through there. I mean, and it was impossible to cross the water course. Bradford Gap was sort of the place where a lot happened. We played road tennis in the road, we played cricket in the road, but in that road as well also lived the mighty Charmer. And I remember well the day when Charmer won the Calypso Crown, because there was a shop at the bottom of the church hill that used to lead to Grisette. And that is a place that Charmer would frequent.
Well, when you hear the ordinary class, this is the way how them laugh. What? My baby! Hold me! I can fall!
And I remember that day he came by and he went to the shop proprietress, Miss Lynch, and he participated of a little libation before he said to us then in the shop, he said, I think I got it this time. I could see him now dressed, you know, as he was, in a black shirt, a white pants, his hat, black and white shoes. And I have these memories of Charmer because he was one of the people in the village. His mother was St. Lucian. She made coconut oil and so on. Just a few houses up the gap from Charmer lived Lord Radio. And as boys, we would gather around the band house at night and listen to the band rehearsing and so on. Lord Radio and the Bimpy Boys. And then an interesting thing would take place. He would sort of warm down by doing pecan, so he would be singing, making up songs off the boys who were gathered around the band house. But radio was always had this entrepreneurial spirit. We know that at one time he had 3 bands on the hotel scene. But more than that, he had 2 taxis. And I remember them well. The first he had 2 he had was a Corsa and a Cortina. Then he changed to 2 Vauxhall Viscount. And the numbers are easy to remember. They were 77, 77, 88, 88. Yeah. And he had a chap who would drive the thing. But we talk about community tourism nowadays as though it is something new, but no, I knew of community tourism years ago because Radio and his, the chap who drove the other taxi, a chap called Bradford, they would take the tourists on the tours. And then once the tour had been completed, they would come back to Radio's house and have lunch because his wife Shirley was a chef. So they all, and then the tourists would come out in the village among the boys and so on. Right. So it was community tourism then, Radio the entrepreneur, and Shirley was always a hard-working woman. I remember she kept pigs, and at one time she had over 200 pigs there. And as boys, some of us would go around. We would go to the Hilton because she had a family. We would go to the Hilton Hotel to collect the pig food and Paradise. And then I look forward every Wednesday night. Shirley would take me down to North Point where her sister Iva worked. And then I would go up to Josie Hill with her, where the Austins on Josie Hill. Right? But and our task as boys, what did we do apart from feed the pigs and bathe them, clean the pig, is that we had to take these, when the pig food came from the Hilton, it was, the people would have thrown, still having toothpicks and some large bones. I didn't know what animals they came from. I thought it was elephants at that time. And also somehow a lot of spoons and forks and knives from the Hilton ended up in the pig food. Result was that many people in the gap, particularly in the village, the wider thing, had spoons and forks and knives with the initial BH on them. For me, yeah, we you know, growing up in the gap. And then lots of people do not know that Lord Oliver was a very good batsman. So while we were playing cricket, sometimes he would come out and he would put 25 cents there and say anybody who would get him out. It did happen sometimes, but it took a lot of effort to achieve that. He was very good as a batsman. So the village had these people living there that added a lot to the community, to the life in the village and so on. I'm smiling now because thinking of some of the characters. There was a character in the village called Bulso. No, Bulso was a chap. I knew him and he was very, very quiet. He worked on the neighboring lodge plantation, leave early on mornings, go out, come back in on the evening, sit down on his step, smoke a pipe, and as soon as dusk thing, he would go in. He had a piece of land further along that he would cultivate, particularly on Saturdays and so on. But the story was, he had also, unfortunately, had some encounter with the cat o' nine tails. And as a result of it, he seems as though that experience said to him, never again. So he kept himself very quiet and to himself by and large. Yeah. We had a man called Gladmouth too. I don't know why they call him Gladmouth, but as boys, it was fun to pass by his house and shout out Gladmouth. Because then he would take after you, and you had somehow to escape. And escape did not mean that you ran home, because then he would talk to your parent about you, and the result is that what he intended giving you, your parent would have given you. So, and then I go back to the main road again, Winfield Bellamy, who it is said built the first locally constructed bus in Barbados. But when I was a boy, he had not established that workshop in that big way. He was a tinsmith. He would make Dutch ovens, he would make baking pans, he would handle tots and so on. And I know he used to do things like fix sewing machines, because he used to fix my grandmother's sewing machine. So, but eventually he graduated from that and established his workshop in the adjoining village of Green Hill. But he had his sort of start in Whitehall. Then at the top of the Whitehall #3, there was a bakery, owned, interesting enough, by a man whose name was Oscar Moore. Of course, everybody called him Ossie Moore. And he had migrated to Curacao. Apparently, he had a bakery in Curacao. When he came back to Barbados, he started a bakery here. And I was around when the bakery started work, helping, sorry, but I should have said when they were constructing the bakery. It is, the structure is still there, chimney and all. But smile because again, you know, the curry, so the mixture of Dutch and Spanish and English, the papimenta and so on. And at times, we would, as boys working in the bakery, by the Benny bakery, we would go and sit on this favorite bench he have, and he would come and say, "Lanta, lanta, lanta," which is get up, get up, or you know. He would say things like, "Karahu, Karahu left out me," you know, that kind of thing. So, but the thing about it is, the bakery for us was an interesting place. The bakery was a place, yeah. I worked in the bakery along with some other boys. My task was to create coconut, and you imagine having to grate 25 or 30 coconuts every evening. Imagine working in the bakery. You had to, first of all, it was a wood oven. You had to help cut the wood and so on, put it in the oven, and the baker would light up the oven early in the morning, and so on. And then once it had turned to cold, he would pull it aside and so on. You work in the bakery, you help them to mix the dough. One of my tasks was to cut the leaves and put them on the salt bread, kind of thing. Wash the pans, grease them, clean the bakery generally, then take out bread and so on. I can well see the bakery with these things called peels that you use to pull but you put the bread in the oven in the first case, so then you pull it out. And sometimes the bread the baker is performing other tasks and the bread starts to burn and he calls you have to pull out this big box, call it, trough, and he's pulling the bread. He's pulling them out too, like oars locked in his arms and pulling out the bread. And sometimes, the bread falls on the side and you as a baker boy, so you had to go and throw these bread, grab them quickly before he step on them, throw them in the box and that kind of thing. The bakery was a place we didn't have fast food establishments then, so the bakery was a place where the fellas assembled. And sometimes the boys would buy a sheet of rust, which had around about 36 to 40 rust. These are turnovers with an extra amount of coconut in them. And the fellas enjoyed them hot out of the oven and so on. And then, of course, there were the things at the weddings. When the weddings were held, people would send meat to the bakery to be baked, sheep and so on, lambs. And as boys, we look forward to that because we would get the salt bread and dip it in. Yeah, the bakery was a place. Of course, we had our fun. Sometimes some of the boys would fall asleep and so on and end up getting themselves flour in the face kind of thing. As boys would, you play your pranks and so on. People then brought nuts to be baked, hawkers and so on, everything. Those ladies who sell nuts, especially then by the Granville Williams, now Fairchild Street bus stand. They would bring their nuts to be baked and so on. Sometimes we enjoyed often enjoyed the pleasure of you get a hot salt bread out of the oven and you got some butter from the bakery. You just cut it, and it would just melt. Oh, and it was delicious, really. But we had fine times as boys growing up in the village. Of course, we had our scooters and so on. Again, the thing between the front road and the scooters were not down the front road, they were up in the back. And the trolleys, we had a trolley that could hold about 6 boys on it. And the fellas had a long trolley and we had some slots in the back to put sticks that they would push behind. And you were coming down this incline and you were supposed to take this corner. Well, many a time we did not take the corner, we took the K-Grow, which was nearby. But again, fun. There was a gentleman in the village as well. Interesting, he was into construction. He was a contractor and so on. But he had a Morris, not the minor, the 1100, the bigger one. And at least once a month, he would park the car neatly on the side of the road, come out with a paint skillet, house paint, and a brush and paint the car. Yeah, the village was, we had lots of fun. We enjoyed it, the sense of community and so on. Again, as a boy, I know people cringe at these things nowadays, but, going with people to kill pigs, your job would be to get the wood, to get the water boiling and so on, to get, we called it bear feed bags then, and, wrap the meat and deliver it. And you've heard countless stories of there being more orders than there was meat, so you had to cut back in order to please everybody, right? And then there was a village shop. A gentleman called Frank Lashley, he was first established in Cahill, but then he moved to Whitehall. And that was pretty big in the context of the late 60s, early 70s. That was a big establishment, and so he got the nickname the Merchant. But at one time he had 4 shop assistants at least, along with a young man who would do the heavy lifting. And he had to carry a bike, and this young man would deliver feed to people in the village. But of course that shop has gone the way more shops have gone. But again, that was a place where many men went, you know, to quench their thirst. I say that, and I'm reminded that Richard Carter, the Tsar, COVID Tsar, he was born and raised opposite the shop there in Whitehall in the village. And next to Richard was a lady called Esther Wickham, who made local confectionery, sugar cakes, glasses, nut cakes, red sweets, roly-poly. Of course, we have a well-known major name for that. And those kinds of things. And she did well, really. She did very well. And her children, 3 of them, have continued the tradition up until today. But she started working at the large plantation as a laborer, so on. But she would on Saturdays do that. But then eventually she got into this thing on a full-time basis. And I remember helping her sons again before they got you know, mechanical electric grater, helping them to husk the coconuts and so on. And then the more difficult thing, because making the white and red sugar cakes, you had to peel the coconuts. Yeah, so that was thing. But again, as boys growing up, we enjoy those sorts of activities. There were people in the community, I mean, many of the boys in the village, I should say, their fathers were not present. But there were always older men that we could attach ourselves to, who had distilled a lot of knowledge and wisdom from life, and although, I mean, I used to go to the shop to buy cigarettes and alcoholic beverages for these gentlemen, but they would say to me, boy, don't start this here, don't do this, this isn't good, right? But they would still, you know, be involved. But there was a man called Dennis. We used to call him Tyson after the cricketing fast bowler. On the evenings, he would have the boys out and we would be playing cricket. You know, he was like a father figure to us, and he would be the one guiding us, coaching us, so to speak, but also making sure that we played fair, right? And he helped to nurture some of those young men who went on to become good, sound, solid citizens. I mentioned my friend Charles. There is Carl Seal, who went on to teach and went off to Bermuda and taught for a number of years in Bermuda. And there were others, fellows who had these chaps to, you know, help them through life and so on.
Interestingly enough, that is a representation of this program and a caption line which we end the program with ever so often. Be good to yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors. Evidently, this was a regular practice here in the community of Whitehall, St. Michael. And it is very important that we speak of the very good deeds of those who saw the development of the youth as their responsibility. This is who we are. Daniel Holder continues the discussion next week at the same time. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Goodbye for now.